Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Onyekolu. Now, when you think of an avalanche, you tend to have a picture of something taking place above ground, such as snow rushing down a mountain, smashing away everything under its path. But what about an underwater avalanche? Well, new data has just been released relating to one such event. It occurred nearly 18 months ago, so if you cast your mind back and you were having problems with your internet connectivity 18 months ago, then maybe this was the cause, and it took place off the coast of West Africa. Well, to find out more, I'm joined now in the studio by Arise international correspondent Faith Orr. Good to see you, Faith. First of all, how do you spot an avalanche like this taking place under the sea? Was it detected purely by chance?
Well, this one took place in a deep canyon just at the mouth of the Congo River, leading away from that. And it's actually likely that nobody would have ever noticed that this had happened had it not snapped two undersea cables that's used to transmit the internet, to transmit data. But it wasn't just the cables that were affected. We have seen scientists, they've put lots of measuring instruments along the Congo River so that they can kind of detect seismic movements in the earth, that sort of thing. And one of their instruments actually sent them an email because the mooring had come loose from the sea anchor because of this huge underwater avalanche off West Africa. And as you said, it did disrupt the internet between Nigeria and South Africa.
And this took place, as you said, off the coast of where the Congo River goes in. And when they looked into what had happened to the telecoms cable, which ended up slowing the internet around Africa, what did they actually see? What happened?
So they realised that two cables had been broken. So one of them was called the South Atlantic 3 West Africa cable, and the other one is the West Africa cable system. So both of those had been broken. Now the process for repairing these cables involves sending down divers or sending down for deeper points like a submersible vehicle, roving vehicle. And then the break is identified, it's brought to the surface, and it's fixed on a ship that's specially designated for these jobs. So those were the two cables that were broken in this instance, but there's about 426 of these cables around the world. Ironically, as the internet becomes more mobile, more wireless, we rely more and more on these cables to transmit all of the data that we use. Now, people are largely unaware of them, but there is about 200 of these incidents in a year. About 135 of those are caused by humans, so fishermen, trawlers, that sort of thing, anchors on the seabed, catching them. But the rest are natural disasters, so things like earthquakes, or in this case, the underwater avalanche. And it's important that the data isn't cut off too much. Obviously, we all rely on it too much. And the reason that customers don't see so much disruption is because companies that rely on them tend to spread their data across different routes. So if one goes, they're not that affected.
And just thinking back to sort of basic geography lessons, a lot of the sediment comes out of the river and goes into an underwater canyon. So this sediment started shifting in a way that it normally wouldn't. Is that what happened?
Essentially, yes. So this underwater avalanche, more properly called turbidity current, say that 3 times quickly, happened on the 14th of January last year, and it's only being reported now because scientists needed time to measure, they recovered their instruments to start with that had been washed away, and then analyse all of the data. But what they've discovered has happened. They've put it down to two very unusual things. The first was the huge flooding in the Congo in December 2019. They're calling that a 1 in a 50-year event. So that sent a lot of water, sent a lot of sediment down the river. And then the second is that what they're saying is that there was a huge spring tide. And this is where it gets a little complicated, but I'm going to try and keep things simple. Sure. So if we can bring up a map of the Congo, and we can just see what this canyon looks like. So effectively, there was low water, low tide, and this huge build-up of sediment because of the flooding. And that is how the avalanche was triggered. So without the ocean above it, the pressure in the sediment changed, and that allowed it to fall. So that's what the scientists are pegging this to. A very unusual event. Two uncommon occurrences came together, and that's why this has happened.
And how long did this go on for? And is that typical of how they usually go on for? How long they usually go on, or do we don't have a sort of geological picture of that?
No, we do have a picture of this. These events are monitored around the world, and this one was a record breaker. It lasted for 2 days. That was how long the sediment flowed. It was 2 days. They say it's the longest sediment avalanche that's ever happened. In excess of a cubic kilometre of sand and mud was picked up, rushed out to sea, and deposited in the deep. And the flow, as I said, kept moving for 2 days, but it actually ran for 1,100 kilometres out into the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, that is a huge area that this managed to get out to, and it also went 4,500 metres deep. So no mistake about it, this was a big one.
So basically, this submarine avalanche is very much like the ones on land, sort of like a snow avalanche, where they start on a steep slope and head on down from there and pick up the sediment along the way. Is that right?
I mean, that's basically it. Obviously, like the ones on land, there are different intensities. So if we can just take a look at a video that was filmed by divers who actually got themselves caught in one. Now, this clearly doesn't have the same intensity, for instance, that the one in the Congo did that broke those cables, but it does give an idea of how the seabed is stirred up, and that's important because that is how they speed up. So these avalanches erode the seabed as they go, picking up sand and mud, which makes the flow denser and faster, so it can build and build. As we saw in the case of the Congo, where it started travelling at just over 5 metres per second, but then it sped up to 8 metres per second by the end of the channel. So that just gives you an idea of exactly how quick and how big these flows can be.
Absolutely. And do they have other effects as well? I mean, I'm wondering if they affect tide or the movement of water at the surface level, and whether there are other ways of noticing it apart from your sort of internet conking out.
So you wouldn't notice this effect, but it was something that I found quite interesting. One of the things that they do is they return sediments, nutrients to the deepest parts of the ocean. Now, it's a part of the planet that we don't necessarily think about that much because obviously we don't see it, but it is, you know, essential part of the planet and all the kind of weird and wonderful life down there. Now, returning all of this through these events is very important to keep it going. Now, the other thing that these events create is something called anti-dunes. Let's just show a very small example of what anti-dunes look like. So anyone who's been to the beach recognises those ripples in the sand that's caused by the water. Those are very small examples of anti-dunes. The ones that are created by the underwater avalanches are a lot bigger. They can create waves thousands and thousands of metres long and up to 15 metres high in some places. So that's one of the other effects that you would see on the water surface through these underwater avalanches.
I've sort of heard people suggesting that this sort of phenomena isn't entirely common. I've heard others say that it is quite common, but some of the really big ones could lead to a tsunami. Is it quite unusual, this sort of geological hazard?
So they're not uncommon, but what made this particular one stand out was the scale of it. You know, smaller events do happen much more often. They've actually been recorded since the 1800s, but it's only in recent years that researchers have really been able to measure them in real time as they're happening. Prior to that, it was sort of coming across the deposits and figuring out what had happened. So that's how things have changed. There's a lot of measurements taken in California, for instance, where the record-breaking speed was. One landslide came in at 6 miles in 57 minutes. That just shows you the speed that they can get up to.
Right.
And Taiwan too, a hot spot there. Lots and lots of cables broken after an earthquake in 2006.
Faith, thanks very much indeed. Faith Orr, our international correspondent. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and the United States, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.